The Gospel according to Luke, the 21st chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be? And what will the sign be that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." And then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes, and various famines and plagues. And there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and siblings, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Well, I've been growing the last 5 or 7 years. So you think, what do you mean you've been growing? I've been growing a couple of cataracts. So I was down to La Crosse here a week ago or so and had a checkup and ended up having to have surgery sometime after the first of the year. But one of the things that struck me, and I had seen this on my phone, that they were tearing down this building that had stood since, I think, 1910 or something of that sort. And of course, going to replace it with something else. And as I drove down the street and turning into the hospital and clinic area, there it was. All a big, huge pile of bricks. Just standing there, kind of kitty corner across the intersection. Whenever I see a building like that, I think a couple of things. One is that I think about the day in which people dedicated that building, or set the cornerstone, or put the first shovel into the earth. But most of all, when it was all completed and how they came into that building and how wonderful they thought that was, and how terrific it was. Never thinking that maybe decades, a few years, a century or two, it might be in just a matter of hours, a pile of rubble. That's the astounding thing that Jesus is talking about here. He's telling them that are marveling at the grandeur of the temple that it won't be all that long, but it was almost 20 years, in which this will be a pile of rubble. Can you imagine the thoughts of those people? How the grandeur and the wonderfulness of this temple would be destroyed? They couldn't imagine that. They couldn't imagine how that would be. But now in Luke's Gospel, he tells us about this. He tells us about what Jesus had said. And Luke, writing probably 50 years later, looked back upon that and saw that in times past, in the year 73, the temple was destroyed. It was all laid to ruins. And so, when we look back upon that 2,000 years later, we're thinking about what they thought at the time, both in Jesus' time as well as in Luke's time. What was it that was captivating them? Was it the grief and the loss of this wonderful building? Or was there more to it than that? I think there is more to it than that. Because the temple was one in which it was the very center of Jewish life and worship. It was extremely important. And that's an understatement. It was the center of life in lots of ways. But what did this mean now? What did this mean? Because there in the temple was where they felt that there was the real presence of God. God was there amongst his people. And there they could find him there. And now it was gone. So where did God go? See, I think that's the first thing that we need to glean from all of this. Is the presence of God is not captivated in a building like this or that temple or any other place. That God finds himself everywhere. That God's presence is everywhere. The question for us is, do we see God's presence active and working in the world? There are many reasons to have doubts on that. And I think that's why Luke is recording this particular story. Because he realizes that this has been a difficult time. You see, in Luke's time, persecution was rampant for Christians. Their life was on the line. Their faith was something that could kill them, literally. Times were difficult. And so I think when we talk about that, in our own day and age, it's very similar. As Jesus says, people are turning away from the faith. People are even being persecuted as Christians in parts of the world. And maybe here in our own country that we don't even see it or know it. But there are wars and rumors of war. There is earthquakes. There is all kinds of famine. There is all kinds of problems. There is a list that is a laundry list that shames any other one. Of all the problems and difficulties that we could sit and talk about and list in our own lives and in the lives of the world and our community and everything. So how do we remain firm in the faith? You see, this is kind of like the refiner's fire. In order to get the gold out of the raw material, you have to turn up the fire, you have to heat it, and then the gold will melt off, and then you will have it. You see, we as human beings don't seem to do very well when things are going that well. And so it's a challenge to our faith. And in Luke's time and in Jesus' time, those kinds of things were a challenge to the presence of God and the faith that they had in him to redeem the world and to provide for the people there that were faithful to him. That there was countless challenge, day after day, time after time, decade and century after century, all the way up to now. And so the challenge of having a firm faith is to realize that even in spite of all of that, God is present in our lives and in the world, actively working to redeem the world in the way it is. To bring about that peace, that shalom, that completeness, that wholeness, that goodness of life those sparks that can occur over and over again to give us that glimpse of God's presence is what we need to keep firm in the faith. We need to be steadfast in that. But one of the things that seems to me about humanity is that we don't do well when things are going well. We think they are, but they're not really. Because we're really not growing. You see, these challenges that we provide for us, that are provided for us in the world, those challenges that Luke experienced, that Jesus experienced, those things challenge one's faith, challenge one's goodness and kindness and all the various things that we need to have as Christian people to be compassionate and understanding and loving and caring and kind and generous. In order to grow in the faith, we need to be challenged by those. And so it is those difficult times that become something of growth. Those difficult times make us what we are, and to move on to improving ourselves, to be more firm in the faith. If you think back on your own life, times in which you grew spiritually as well as in other ways was when things were tough, when things were difficult. And that's what it takes here. And that's what Luke is pointing out to us through the words of Jesus. That in order to grow, we need to struggle a bit. In order to grow, we need to realize that life is not just a bowl of cherries, but maybe more about the pits. To grow in the faith, to be firm in the faith, is necessary. I don't know if you've paid close enough attention through the last 6 months. Well, not quite 6 months. But the life of the church, symbolized by green, is coming to an end. Because the life of the church, all the way from Trinity and Pentecost Sunday, all through the summer, all through the fall, and right up to today, until next week is Christ the King, the end of that long journey. But in that long journey, if you've been listening and paying attention, you should be disturbed. And the reason you should be disturbed is because of the text that Luke uses. He has always challenged us along the way about our generosity, about the justness of life, about the use and abuse of wealth, about reaching out to people in need and those impoverished, those who need healing. You see, he is a constant challenge to the privileged, to those who have so much and are not willing to share it with the rest. It is a real challenge to our day and age and to all days and ages. But it probably is more apparent in our age now than ever. You see, it's a challenge for us through this whole period of the church, life of the church. All these texts that Luke talks about that challenge us, challenges us to grow in faith and to realize that the injustices in life, the inequities, the poverty, and all the other aspects of life that we see as unfortunate, all those things become a challenge to us. But they are a challenge for us for a reason. For us to grow firm in faith. To be people who grow in faith constantly and are never satisfied with where they are. And so today, as we pray the Lord's Prayer, as we are to do in heaven, we need to think about that. And we need to do here what needs to be done in heaven. And so we need to grow firm in the faith because we need to keep growing in the faith and realizing how much more we need to do. And you see, it was a challenge for those people in Luke's time and in Jesus' time as well. But there's another element here I think that's important. And that is, if we're going to grow in faith, if we're going to grow firm in faith, we have to take some risks. And we're not very open to that. We're always kind of keeping it close to the vest. We want things to be sure and certain. To take risks is something to step out from ourselves and to advance ourselves, in a sense, to grow, is to take those risks. Those risks that our faith challenges us to take. Because that's exactly what's happened here. That's what's happened with the destruction of the temple. That's what's happened as Jesus talks about all of these things. Are we willing to risk enough in our faith to stand up against some of the things that we need to stand up against? Or are we willing to convey those kinds of messages that need to proclaim the gospel in our life? And so Luke, in his gospel, what does he say? He says these are opportunities for witness. These are opportunities for witness. How are we witnessing? What kind of risks are we willing to take? You see, when Jesus says these words about the temples to be destroyed, well, in the other Gospels, they want to take him over to the pinnacle of the temple and throw him over or stone him. They can't stand those words. You see, Jesus takes that risk because he wants to make sure that people are growing in the faith, people are to see the presence of God, and people act upon it. They act upon it in taking those risks. And so when we talk about giving or tithing or anything like this, the biblical directive is not the leftovers, it's the firstovers. You see, and most of us figure out this and this and this and this, and then, well, okay, yeah, we'll give this extra $100 now because we get that left over. Rather than the other is we'll give the $100 and then we won't go out to eat tomorrow because we're going to save that money because we don't have it. I think most of us that are sitting here are not worried about that kind of a thing either. We've got it. But we're hanging on to it. You see, are we willing to risk in our faith? Are we willing to put our money where our mouth is? Are we willing to witness to the world that we are different people? One of the things is when we go south, we always take 2-lane roads almost the whole way. And we go through places in West Virginia and Kentucky and Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama. If we go to Florida, if we go the other way, mostly that way, the southeast, going through what we call the Bible Belt. And you come out in the country on these 2-lane roads that are probably U.S. highways or state highways. They're not back roads per se, usually. But I'm astounded at all the little churches. And once in a while we'll be on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night, because that's when the Baptists show up. And this little church that probably seats no more than this congregation, and that parking lot is jammed full. And my message that I glean from all of that is, and it's in rural areas often. So we're not talking about millionaires and billionaires. We're talking about common, ordinary people that have the means of life to get along but are not affluent by any means. But they can support that church. And I see this over and over and over again. A dedicated group of people that have supported that church all the time and continue to perpetuate that. And they are interested in what? In the opportunity to testify, to witness. They are willing to put their faith on the line. They are willing to take the risk of their faith and have to maybe give up some other things. But I see that over and over again. And so when I see a congregation complaining about finances and all that sort of thing, it doesn't wash very good with me. Because we're not taking the risks. We're not putting ourselves out there. We're not really compromising any of our things. We're not really willing to do what we need to do. And so we need to take that risk. We need to be a genuine witness, a genuine testimonial in the world. And that's what Jesus and Luke was calling us to do. So it isn't just seeing the presence of God and perceiving that in our own individual lives and maybe the work of the congregation or other things or in the world. It isn't just growing just for growth's sake. No, it's growing in the faith, to have a firm faith, to take the risks, to do those extra and special things with no real second thought. I want to share with you a quote. It's by someone who you've never heard of, like Albert Einstein. And I really got a number of quotes by him, and you often think about him in a certain way. Not necessarily in a spiritual way. This isn't particularly spiritual per se, but it is for me. It is in this context. I've been trying to figure out how to use this in a sermon for a long time. I decided I'm using it today. You listen close. Not everything that can be counted counts. And not everything that counts can be counted. Let me run that by again. Not everything that can be counted counts. And not everything that counts can be counted. You see, when it's about giving ourselves, about giving our finance, about giving whatever it is we have to give, about growing in the faith, about the presence of God, we cannot make it an exercise of arithmetic. But it's an exercise of being firm in the faith and living that faith all the time. And so may the peace of God that surpasses all understanding keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.